Now I will go into a little bit more detail about how you can dig in deeper into the tools and panel options. I am first of all going to open up an image, and I am clicking on the Launch Bridge button that is up in the application bar. Launching Bridge, and I am still in the Chapter 1 folder in Project Files in the PSCS4 Advanced folder, and I am double-clicking on the Singer file. Opening this up, click OK. I have the image open. What I want to show you is that in addition to that, there are also methods for accessing panels that are relevant to the tool that you have selected. So in other words, if I click on the brush tool, I can click on the right side of the options to bring up the brushes panel. If I click on the clone stamp tool, I now can bring up the clone source panel or the brushes panel. So again, easy ways to access the tools that you need as you're working. The other thing that I want to make sure you understand is that in addition to the tools that you see, there are also entirely hidden tools. So in other words, if I go to my paintbrush tool, I can turn on or off the airbrush tool. Now, what's the difference between the regular brush tool and when I turn that on? Well, let me change this back to 100% opacity so you can see something. I am going to take advantage of a little tip that works in Photoshop. It started in Photoshop CS3. I'm holding down my Command key or Control key and clicking and dragging right across that value in opacity to change it back to 100%. So I am going to use the brushes panel, select the soft round 65 pixel brush, close this up, and I also want to sample a color. If I hold down my Option or Alt key, my brush tool turns into a eyedropper, and I can sample perhaps this purple color up here. All right, so I've got this brush set up, and I'm going to start painting. This will be opaque, but I just want you to see something. I am clicking and dragging to paint. Now, when I have my mouse held down and I'm on the paintbrush, absolutely nothing happens. I click on the airbrush option, and I click and drag, and watch what happens. Do you see it spreading? Just like an airbrush. It's just blowing out more ink. So what I want you to realize is that some tools are hidden inside tools. Another really helpful tool, if I go to my pen tool, it's my regular old pen tool, and I decide that I want to take advantage of a hidden tool which is called the magnetic pen tool. If some of you have used the magnetic lasso tool, you will really like the magnetic pen tool because the magnetic pen tool leaves anchor points that you can go back to and edit later. So in other words, I go to my pen tool, click on the freeform pen tool, and now I can check or uncheck magnetic. If I click and let go, you'll see that it is creating a path. I'm not clicking myself. I'm just dragging it near the point of contrast. This brings me to another point. Notice my tooltip. My tooltip looks like a pen with a magnet. That's not really helpful to me at this point. Notice if I put my caps lock key on that I get a precision tool, and what that is representing to me is the radius that the pen tool is looking at from which to create its path. So in other words, when I come into this area where I'm at right now with the shoulder and the microphone, it's probably going to be a little bit confused as to what to stick to. So you can control that radius by bringing it up or down with keyboard shortcuts. We'll get into that in a short bit. But if I continue on, you'll see that it is definitely following that path right along the microphone. If this finger was just a little bit more narrow, it might miss and just go straight across. But again, this tool was only accessible by going into the pen tool, clicking on another option, and then it appears. So lots of things that are hidden in Photoshop, so many things are undocumented and hidden within here. So moving on, discussing pen tips a little bit more. I'm going to press Escape, the ESC key, up in the upper left of the keyboard to escape that pen path. Escape is really helpful whenever you want to get out of anything where, whether it be a transform or you're in the middle of setting text that you decide you don't want to do. Just hit the ESC key. Now I'm going up to my preferences, Photoshop, preferences. This will be under edit preferences on the Windows platform. I am choosing cursors. And notice that I can choose different painting cursors depending upon what I'm doing. So the standard cursor displays just the pointer as tool icons. Precise displays the pointer as a crosshair. You can see this here. Okay, precise. If I go to the normal brush tip, the pointer outline corresponds to approximately 50% of the area that the tool will affect. If I choose full brush size, the pointer outline corresponds to nearly 100% of the area that the tool will affect. And then the show crosshair in the brush tip will actually put a crosshair right in there for you so that you can be precise yet see the radius of your brush. And that's kind of a neat tool tip right there. Now, something that I'll just mention here, I'll go back to normal brush tip. I'll click OK. Let me switch to the brush tool. Okay, so here I am brushing away and I can see the radius of my brush. But what a lot of people do is they turn on their caps lock key and they get the precision tool. That is the keyboard shortcut to switch your brush to a precision tool. But what a lot of people don't understand is that it is appearing there because their caps lock key is down. And I have had people who talk to me and say, hey, I've installed Photoshop 2 more times and I keep seeing the wrong cursor. And I'll simply say, hey, you know what? Caps lock key is down. They click on it, and even though they've installed Photoshop twice, they had their caps lock key down the whole time, thereby leaving them with the precision cursor intact. Now, moving on to some additional items. I want to see my tools panel in 2 columns. So I'm clicking on the double arrow up here in the upper left. I can see that my brush that I created, I changed the brush size. I did change it to airbrush. I did change it from the standard black to a different color. I've done several things to this, and in fact, I'm going to hold down my Command key and just even change the opacity a little bit. So maybe I really like this brush. And I've done 4 or 5 things to the brush tool in order to reach this point. What if I want to use this set of attributes in another image 3 weeks from now? And I don't want to have to remember everything that I've done. A lot of people don't take advantage of tool presets, but they're extremely helpful. If I go up to this button, I can click on the arrow and I can open up all the existing tool presets that Adobe has provided for me. Like many presets, I don't typically use a lot of them. I prefer to create my own. So if I click on the Create New Tool preset, I can create my new brush and it will give it a descriptive term. Brush tool, soft round 65. I can add something to this and just say, you know, this is purple so that I know what color it is. I can tell it to include the color and I can click OK. Now, I'll just go ahead and set this back up to 100% opacity and turn off the airbrush and maybe even change the brush size and then just start painting. But then I decide that I want to go back to that brush. I can go back to the tool preset and I can change this back to my brush. So I choose the brush tool, soft round 65 purple, click OK, and now I have exactly the same brush attributes that I had set previously and saved. Other options for presets. Let's say that you go into the gradient tool and you decide that you're going to create a gradient. I can create a gradient or I can use pre-existing gradients by clicking on the arrow up in the gradient preview in the options panel. Now perhaps I don't like any of these. I can click directly on the gradient and it'll bring up the gradient editor dialog box. I might decide that I want a really cool purple gradient. I click on the gradient editor underneath it to put in a gradient slider. I can click on the arrow down in color and change this to the foreground, background, or even user color. So I might want to come out here and choose that I want to add a purple. And you can also get user color by just clicking on the color box. And you can sample a color that way as well. Maybe I want to change this to a different opacity. Then I would click on the top and you'll notice that I can change the opacity. And I really, really like this gradient. I want to use this frequently, and in fact, I might want it up there all the time in Photoshop. Notice that I can save my gradients, and I'll call this my gradients. Automatically, this gets saved in the gradients folder, in the presets, in the program folder. I don't even have to find where to save it. Click Save and click OK. Now, anytime I want to access that as a preset, I can do one of two things. I can go under Edit and go to the Preset Manager, and you'll notice that when I go to Gradients, that is included in my gradients. I can load my gradient. Or what I can also do is I can go back into my gradient editor and I can choose Load, and I can choose my gradients that way as well. And when you choose to load gradients, you can either choose to append them, which will mean that it will add them to your existing gradients, or you can just overwrite the existing ones that you have. So next, let's just review the panel options because they're pretty critical. Let's say that I want to pull up my layers panel. I'm grabbing it by the tab, and I am going to click on the panel menu. And you'll see that when I click on the arrow up here in the upper right that is included in all of your panels, I can do things such as duplicate the layer, create a new group, convert to smart object. These are all items that I can do at this point with the background layer that I have selected. If I were to add an additional layer, so I'll just go ahead in here and click on New Layer, you'll see that when I click on the panel menu, I now have additional items that I can do. I am not going to go into these panel menus in great detail at this point, but I just want you to know that when I'm referencing in later steps that I want you to go to the panel menu, that you understand that the panel menu is different on each panel. So in other words, here's my color panel, and it's got the hue, saturation, brightness slider, CMYK slider, lab slider, totally different panel menu than what I got in the layers panel. By the way, little quick trick that's kind of helpful. If you are in colors and you want to switch your slider, just hold down your shift key and click, click, click right on that color ramp. And that's the same thing as going into the panel menu and selecting the grayscale ramp or whatever it may be that you're trying to select. Okay, so hopefully you've got enough information there to kind of help you dig into the tools and panels a little bit further.